Hi, everyone. I'm Jacqueline from Arrive Yoga and Mindfulness, and I have a short practice today for your feet. So we're going to do some work to mobilize and strengthen the feet. We'll also do some practice to stretch and release the hips, because we know when the hips are tight, it's going to affect the mobility in the knees. It's going to affect the mobility in the ankles and in the feet. So we'll do some hip stretches as well. So in terms of props, you'll need a chair, a foam block if you've got one. If you don't have a foam block, maybe grab like a foam cushion. And you will also need a ball. So a golf ball will work, a tennis ball, or maybe you've got a physio ball, like a little ball like that. And we'll get started. We're going to come onto our back and swing our legs up onto the chair. Right? And then because this is such a great thing to do for the whole body, to find some equilibrium from your day, right? We'll just take a few moments here to settle. Yeah, so we shift our attention to our practice and to our body meeting the ground, feeling where the back of your body connects to the ground, to the flat surface there. So you'll feel kind of the bony parts of the body, perhaps the elbows, knuckles, back of the skull, back of the pelvis, shoulders, maybe parts of the spine. Landing on the ground, and just take a moment to encourage those places to release and drop back into the ground just a little bit more. And then as the body slowly settles in, we make a bit of room in the body for breath, a little more room for breath to move. So connecting to your breath, the natural rhythm of your breath as you breathe in and out. And with the feet elevated in this way above the pelvis and above the heart and head, right, we begin to help kind of release some tension and fluid, right, from the lower body, draining from the feet through the legs down into the torso, the fluid being absorbed by the lymph system and being sent back into the circulatory system through the heart. So you might, even by just doing this, you might start feeling some weight coming off the feet, the legs, maybe some tingling life energy returning to the feet and calves. The calves might be tingling a little here, maybe not. And we're going to do something now for the hips. And I'll really encourage you to move at your own pace and don't do anything that doesn't feel safe or right for your body. We're going to cross one ankle over the opposite thigh and then flex the foot. You could flex both feet, but particularly the one that's crossed over the ankle. And we're just going to simply swing this thigh in towards the midline and then swing it out. So swinging in, and swinging out. As best as you can, keeping your pelvis really still. It'll move, it'll shift a little, but what we don't want to do is sort of move the thigh by swinging the pelvis. And one way to know if you're doing that or not is to feel the back of your pelvis where your sacrum is kind of anchored to the floor. And as you swing your leg in and out, you want to keep some measure of stillness there in that contact point where your sacrum meets the ground. So this gentle movement to get into your hip socket, right, where your femur comes into the hip socket. And just imagine if that's all stuck when you're walking and if there's restricted movement in your hip, then the movement has to transfer somewhere. It'll either go below or above, and often it goes down into the knee, into the ankle, which end up doing all the work. So I really recommend, right, for helping the feet, let's do a little help for the hips. So the next time your leg swings out to the side, hold it there. So actively what you're using are your hip rotators. They're turning this thigh out to the side. Hold it there, and then if you need a little bit more stretch in the back of the hip, you could slide your foot in towards the edge of the seat of the chair. Yeah, and you might even take hold of the back of your thigh. Flex both feet here. Drop your head back, drop your shoulders back. You might stay for 3 or 5 full rounds of breath. And then when you're finished, just sliding the foot on the chair back and uncrossing your ankle, and then pausing a moment before you hurry to the next side. Coming to side 2 when you're ready, ankle across the other thigh, flexing the foot. And again, we're just opening and closing, or swinging that thigh away from you and in towards you. Really, we're just exploring here our range of motion in the hip socket, not to be discouraged if it feels really tight. This is why we're practicing. And there's so many variations. You might find that even in your own hips, one side feels very different from the other. And moving, you might, it depends on how much yoga practice you've done. You might already be synchronizing your movement with your breath. And if that doesn't come automatically to you, I'd say not to worry so much if you're exhaling in one direction or inhaling. Just tune into the breath when you remember to, and try not to impede the breath. So not to hold the breath or force the breath. The breath is kind of there as an internal measure of time. It's your own personal metronome. Good, and then let's turn that thigh out, pause, hold it there using your external hip rotator. That just means that your thigh is externally rotating away from your midline. Yeah, and then hold, and then sliding your foot a little closer if you need to get a deeper stretch into the back of the hip, into the glutes back there. And You could even take hold of the back of that left thigh. Yeah, careful not to get all tight and grippy in the shoulders and in the neck and jaw. So we want to rest the head back, the heart back, and really give the hip here your full attention. Breathing in and breathing out. And then as you're ready, release. Please know you could stay in these stretches for longer, right? If you enjoyed that. Bringing your leg to the chair, pausing a moment. I'm hoping that already you're starting to feel a little bit more circulation, a little more prana or energy coming into your hips. Okay, so from here, we're going to come off the chair, legs off the chair. If you're able to just kind of slide your chair away with your feet, right, you might do that. Just be careful. Or you might need to come up and move your chair right off your mat. And then come back down onto your back. Bend the knees, bring your feet flat to the floor, about hip width apart. And have your ball here at hand. Right, so I'm going to use the golf ball. I'm going to bring it down and put it underneath one of your feet. This is so simple. Just rolling the ball around with your foot. I say it's simple. Certainly not a very, complicated yoga move. However, it's kind of complex what's happening here. Little bit of pressure there on the bottom of the foot, different areas, right, through the inner arch. We're waking up here the connective tissue on the sole of the foot. And so the inner arch, the balls of the feet, the fleshy parts, right? The pads, the bottom of the feet, the outer edge of the foot, the heel, which is the calcaneus. It's the name of the heel bone. The toes. You might even try gripping the ball with your toes. Roll across all your toes from the big toe. You might even find the pads of the toes, so like the finger or the toe prints from your big toe down to the baby toe and then in between the toes. So really there's no way to do this wrong. And depending on what kind of ball you have, the density or the size of the ball, this will feel different. And we're not looking for anything big to happen. It's just this gentle movement to, I say, wake up the tissues, the connective tissues, which get all crisscrossed and compact and tight. And what we'd like is there to be some fluidity. The tissues are, connective tissues are just layers of collagenous fibers with water, right? But they get dry and the collagenous fibers get all stuck together like felt. So we're just kind of helping this foot to awaken. Yeah, change sides when you're ready. Roll around. Kind of nice to do this on your back because there's less weight bearing on the ball, so your foot can be a little lighter. You also might have a bit more control as to how much pressure you're putting into the ball, into the foot. So can you find the inner arch? The balls of the feet, toes rather, so the balls of the big toe and the baby toe, we often use those as landmarks in our yoga practice. The long outer edge of the foot, calcaneus, heel bone, the toes, between the toes, see if you can grip the ball. If you happen to have a slightly larger ball that has some give, it's like you could, grip the ball a little better. The golf ball doesn't work so well for that, but working the toe muscles. Okay, wonderful. And then we'll just kind of kick that ball away, out of the way, and now bring your footprints to your mat so that your heels are right underneath your knees and your shins are vertical. Yeah. Let's take the arms down by our sides, palms down, and we're going to push the feet into the floor. Reach your footprints down into the ground. And with your hands also facing down and the arms alongside your body, we're going to reach the palms into the floor, reach your feet into the floor, and let your pelvis begin to lift. So activating this movement from your feet. And once the pelvis starts to lift, you'll feel other muscles coming on board, other structures coming on board. So your glutes, right? The bum muscles helping to lift the pelvis. You might feel some weight coming down through the arms and through the shoulders. Let's just pause here, take a few breaths, and keep paying attention in the feet as you exhale, lower your pelvis down. And notice, be there when your pelvis lands and just let it go. Let the sacrum melt. We'll do this again, and let's turn the palms this time up towards the ceiling. So feel the difference there compared to palms down. When we turn the palms up, the shoulders then roll out as opposed to rolling in. So they roll back and out, palms opening towards the ceiling, and then reach the feet into the ground again. Find your footprints, so the little toe pads, the mounds of the toes, the heel bones, reaching down, and yet there's a little lift in your inner arches. And with the arms in this position now, can you feel a bit more weight dropping down through the back of the shoulders into the shoulder blades? So this is called Setu Bandha Sarvangasana, Sanskrit name for this yoga pose. It's called the bridge. And pause and breathe. Let the legs here work to lift your pelvis. Let the feet reach into the ground so that there's an opposing action lifting up through the sternum, through the pelvis. Your sternum is your chest, your breastbone. Whew, and then exhale and lower down and be attentive to where the pelvis lands, how it lands, the back of the pelvis, touching the earth, releasing your shoulders. Let's stretch the legs out for a moment and pause there. Right. Okay, and now we're going to do a little work moving the ankles, and I'd like us to use this foam block. And no worries if you don't have one. Maybe you have a book or something that you could use instead, or a firm cushion. If you have a wood block, that's fine too. It's just a little harder on the bones of the feet. Can you see I've got the block tall side up, and I'm just gently going to hold the block there with enough effort to feel contact there, inner edges of the feet contacting the block. Yeah, so what I was going to say was let your inner heels and the inner mounds of your big toes press into the block. And just notice here the action in your legs, what's happening in your legs. And you may, and it's not so much, oh, you know, this is happening. It's feeling the action in the legs as you squeeze the block with your inner heels and the inner edges of your big mounds of the big toes. Notice what it feels like in the back of your pelvis, in your sacrum, in your tailbone. Okay, now we're going to switch things up a little bit. We're going to hold the block with the mounds of the big toes, but we're going to take the heels away from the block. So the heels are no longer touching, the ankles aren't touching, it's just the mounds of the big toes. And squeeze into the block again. Once more, notice what's happening in the legs, in the back of the pelvis. My guess is it feels slightly like the legs are internally rotating. And you might also be at the back of the pelvis, you might be more towards the tailbone end of the sacrum. So your low back might have a little arch to it. Okay, let's change it up. Heels now, toes away from the block, heels, and you might go, you're kind of going pigeon-toed now. And just notice how this changes things in the legs. They might feel externally rotated, right? Knees and toes are looking away from each other. The low back might feel like it's flattened a little bit, and you might be more kind of at the top of the sacrum rather than down at the tailbone. And this is just kind of information for us when we come to standing. And, you know, what are the legs and hips doing in relation to the feet? So let's just quickly explore again those three places. So there was the inner edges of the feet. So that's the inner heels, inner edges of the big toes, holding the block. You might also notice what other things come on board here. These are your adductors, the muscles that help to bring the limbs in towards your midline. And you might also feel some nice work in your core, in your abdominal muscles, or in the pelvic floor here, holding the legs in towards the midline. And then we went to, oh, this is pigeon-toed. I think I called the outturned movement pigeon-toed. I think this one is, right? So toes in, heels out, press into the block. Notice what else gets fired up for me. The quadriceps at the front of the thighs kind of fire up. And there's a little lift there in the back of the waist, right? And then heels holding the block, toes turned out. Let the shoulders relax. Come back to your breath. Good. And then release. We can just slide the block out of the way. You could just nudge it with your feet away. And then this time we're going to bend the knees and bring the feet flat to the floor, but bring your inner seams together. So inner knees together, inner edges of the feet. And on a breath, it could be an inhale or an exhale. Let the knees drop out to either side and just don't move the feet here. You'll come onto the outer edges of your feet. And then exhale and draw the knees and the inner edges of the feet back together. Okay, so roll onto the outer edges of the feet. The knees drop to either side. And then drawing the knees and the inner edges of the feet back together. And we'll just repeat. The knees can drop as far to the floor as it's comfortable for you, for your hips. If there's any pain in your hip joints doing this, then please stop. Right? And I would suggest just keeping the knees together. After a number of these, you might begin to feel your adductors getting a little tired, right? They might shake a little. So I like to go really slow and bring the knees together really slowly so that you're using gravity and the weight of your legs here as resistance. Just a really easy, way to strengthen these inner thighs without needing to strap, weights onto the legs or use some kind of gym equipment. And maybe more importantly here, we're just rolling on the feet. So as you take the knees wide, you're on the outer edges there, and then let your feet work to draw the knees back in. The next time the knees come in towards each other, let's draw one knee in towards the chest, take hold of the shin, hug that thigh in towards your chest, and circle the foot. I say circle, but you don't have to circle. You could turn the foot in, turn the foot out, point the foot, flex the foot, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, pronate, supinate. These are the words for those of you who know them and like to use those anatomical, directional words. Good. Let's place that foot down. Lift the other knee in. Same thing, just moving at the ankle joint as you hold your thigh in towards your ribs. We're not going to spend too much more time here with this practice, but I do want us to come up to standing before we finish. So when you're ready, we'll bring both feet back down to the floor, roll to one side, and pause there a moment. Use your arms and your hands to press yourself up. Okay. And from here, we're going to come right up onto our feet. And if that's tricky for you, right, there's also the chair here. So you could, yeah, let the chair assist you to come up to standing. Maybe balance is also tricky for you. So having a chair available, using the back of the chair can also be helpful. So in yoga, this is called mountain pose, when we come to stand consciously in relationship to the ground below and the space around us, space above us. When I say consciously, what I mean is bringing the pelvis and the shoulders into alignment with the heels, so that we are more vertical. And the spine is also in a position to support our frame, as opposed to, hips forward, hips back. So finding this alignment, hips over the ankles, feet are turned in the direction that your knees are turned, which can be tricky. We'll have a whole other maybe class on that. But any case, not to force your feet or your knees into a position that feels unsafe, right? So generally we have the feet parallel in mountain pose, because do you remember when we were holding the block, and when the feet are turned in, there's this internal rotation happening there, and the pelvis tips forward, we end up with more of a curve in our back. When the feet are turned out, the opposite happens. We kind of lose our butt, flatten the waist, and the legs are turned out. And there's all kinds of variations. So in mountain pose, we try to bring things back into balance, somewhere where there's balance and ease. So if the feet are parallel, it gets us out of those two extremes. And the heel bones, calcaneus, are underneath the sitting bones. Find your footprints, heels, outer edges of the feet, the balls of the feet, and the pads of the toes. Okay, and very gently, we're going to do a little strengthening and weight bearing now. You're going to roll forward onto the balls of the toes, lift the heels if your feet are able to manage this. Don't come up too high if it's too much. We're going to bring the heels back down, shift the weight back into the heels, lift your toes. And then once again, roll your weight forward into the toes, lift the heels. And then dropping the heels, shifting your weight back, lifting the toes. And we'll just go back and forth a few more times. And when you're finished, just come back to land in mountain pose. I would do a few more of those if that felt okay. Maybe pause, take a rest, and then do another little set. And I think that's all. We'll conclude today with just those movements. And stay tuned. We might have a sequel. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that was helpful. Please email the studio if you have any questions, info@arriveyoga.ca. You can check out our website at arriveyoga.ca. Be well, everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.